Hey everyone, welcome back to another OSRS buyer's guide slash item review where we talk about the usefulness of items for their price point, where we think they fit into a player's progression, etc., etc. Today we're going to be talking about the Venator bow, which is a bit of a unique item. It's also an item that I feel is a little bit underrated. People generally have a good idea of like the type of places where it's useful, but at the same time, I feel like they don't quite understand just how good it is at those places where it is useful. So today, we're going to try to clarify that a little bit, and I'm going to try to tell you where I think the Venator bow fits in terms of value for price. So the Venator bow, let's go ahead and look at the header, is 74 mil right now. It's a pretty expensive weapon. I will say that it's kind of hard to put together. Like 1 out of 100 drops from Phantom Muspa. That's a pretty decently tall requirement. And so as a result, it does have a decently high price tag of 74 mil. If you don't know what the Venator bow does, it is a 4-tick ranged main hand weapon. So it's a 4-tick bow, but what makes it unique is it has this AoE effect where if you shoot a target and then there's another like target within a 2x2 basically of that target that you first shot, it's going to bounce. Your arrow's going to bounce to that target and then it's going to bounce back to your original target or to another target if there's like another 2x2. So up to 2 times the arrow's going to bounce off of your target and it's going to hit another target. And this bounce is worth 2/3 of the damage of the original shot. So that means that for each arrow you shoot, you not only get the full damage of your arrow, but then you get another 2/3 damage and then another 2/3 damage on top of that if it bounces all 3 times. And in the places where you're using the Venator bow, it should bounce all 3 times. That is a shit ton of damage. I know it might sound like a lot, but a lot of people don't tend to understand just how much damage that is. When we get into its use cases and I start comparing it to other weapons, you'll start to understand just how much damage that is. Now, I want to start with a couple of the use cases that people already know about that are like really well known. The Colosseum. The Venator bow is a 2-tick save for killing the Major in the Fremennik Warband. So every single wave in the Colosseum, you're going to get attacked by a Fremennik Meleeer, Major, and Ranger. It is your first priority every Colosseum wave to kill these mobs because they cause you so much damage. The best option for killing the Major is to hit it with 2 3-tick shots from like an Atlatl or something, assuming you don't have a Venator bow. If you do have a Venator bow, you can kill it in 1 4-tick shot. So it saves you 2 ticks killing the Major in the Fremennik Warband. Now you might be sitting there thinking 2 ticks, that doesn't sound like a big deal. It's a big deal because this is 2 ticks when you're killing the Warband. And every tick that the Warband is alive, you're taking a lot more damage. So as a result, this actually saves you a lot of damage in a Colosseum run and gives you a much better chance to stay alive because it helps you take down the Warband that much faster. Like, I could run Quartet if I had a Venator bow with me in Colosseum and for the most part be fine, but without a Venator bow, I would never even consider touching Quartet because the Warband's just going to cause me too much damage. That's an example of how big of a difference maker the Venator bow is at the Colosseum. If somebody's sending their first Quiver, I would really not recommend that they do it without a Venator bow. If they don't have enough money to shuffle things around and get a Venator bow, then I would recommend they probably wait until they have enough money to get a Venator bow before sending their first Quiver, because it's going to make the Colosseum that much easier. I want to come in here before the really experienced Colosseum players come in and say, well, you don't need a Venator bow to clear Colosseum. Obviously, you don't need a Venator bow to clear Colosseum, and obviously me and you can clear a Colosseum with an Atlatl with our eyes closed. This is a person doing a first Quiver, and I'm assuming they don't want to be stuck at the Colosseum beating their head against it and getting frustrated for like more time than they have to be. Well, in that situation, they're probably going to save themselves several hours of frustration and beat the Colosseum a lot sooner and easier if they've, gone out of their way to get 75 mil to get a Venator bow, which on a main account doesn't take that much time. So yeah, obviously you don't need a Venator bow to get your first Quiver, but I will say if I'm a main sending my first Quiver and I know what I know now, if I could go back and talk to myself, I would say wait until you have a Venator bow because it's just going to make your life that much easier. At the Whisperer, the Venator bow has the benefit of allowing you to kill every single ghost that comes out during the chorus special. So when she summons, I think it's 12 ghosts, the Venator bow allows you to kill all 12 of them. This gives you a guaranteed plus 25 damage over just killing the ones that say Moors, which you can do with a blowpipe. That's the meta with a blowpipe, is to just kill the ones that say Moors, and that will give you 50 damage and prevent you from taking the hit. If you use this bow, you kill all 12 ghosts, which gives you an extra 25 damage, and then it also gives you a prayer boost and a HP heal on top of that. So it's got quite a bit of utility at the Whisperer. It's going to save you probably like 5 seconds a kill, and then it's also going to make it so that you get a little passive healing and passive prayer at the Whisperer, which can extend your trips and maybe draw that out even further. I wouldn't say the Whisperer is the biggest use case of the Venator bow, but if you have one, it's definitely nice to have for the Whisperer. It's not mandatory by any means, but it is useful there, definitely. At Grotesque Guardians, the Venator bow is your best in slot weapon against Dawn, which is the one that you use ranged against. The reason is because, what you actually do is you take a blowpipe at the start of the kill, and then you're blowpiping Dawn, and as you're blowpiping Dawn, you drag Dusk, the meleeer, underneath Dawn, and then once Dusk gets in that position, you switch to your Venator bow and start shooting Dawn with it. That's because the Venator bow has about plus 8 to 10% DPS over the blowpipe, which is a pretty significant margin when it's bouncing off of Dusk and hitting Dawn twice. So as a result, this is a best in slot weapon for Grotesque Guardians. Now I want to talk about the stuff that you probably don't know. And you probably do know that this is a really good weapon for Slayer. What you probably don't realize is just how strong it is. So for 2x2 Slayer tasks, assuming you don't have dancers available, accounts that can dance to stack your mobs for you, basically, even if they're 2x2, which allows you to use Barrage. Almost nobody has that. Especially anybody who's building like an account for the first time definitely won't have that. So they want to have a Venator bow for their 2x2 Slayer tasks because it is much, much stronger than the other options that they have available. Just to give you an illustration of how strong this weapon is, if you take this weapon into Wilderness Slayer at the Wilderness Slayer caves and you use it against Hellhounds, Lesser Demons, or Ice Giants, which are all 2x2 mobs, this weapon is 20% stronger than a crossbow in the Wilderness. Assuming that it's getting to bounce all 3 times, yes, it is 20% better than a crossbow. I will never sell my Venator bow because I need it for point boosting. I need it for Wilderness Slayer because I know that if I don't have this weapon, it's going to make my Hellhounds tasks, my Ice Giants tasks, my Lesser Demon tasks, all tasks that I do for points in Wilderness Slayer, they're going to take about 5 minutes longer every single task because I don't have a Venator bow and I'm taking, say, a crossbow out instead, which is significantly worse against 2x2 Slayer mobs. And this is also true for outside of the Wilderness when you're doing Slayer in multi. So in like the excuse me. So in the Catacombs of Corin, for example, when you have a Bloodveld task, when you have a Fire Giants task, when you have a Dagonoth task, all of these tasks, this weapon is exceptionally strong and is going to let you do far more DPS than you could with other options. We're talking like upwards of 30% more DPS than you could do with your next best option, assuming you don't have Barrage available, which again, if you don't have Dancers, you don't for 2x2 Slayer tasks. So what I would say, and then also for Barbarian Assault, this is an extremely strong weapon. If you're doing the attacker role, this weapon is better than a Third Age bow by I don't know exactly how much, but I know it's significantly better. You do still take a single target weapon with you into Barbarian Assault, but the Venator bow is the main weapon that you use for most of the waves because when it's bouncing around and hitting multiple targets, its DPS is just completely unparalleled. Now, this last use case I have listed on here might look like a meme to some of you, but a lot of you also don't realize that if you go out to zombie pirates right now with a Venator bow and you just go in a super low risk setup and mostly AFK with a cannon, just pick up the big alks that drop on the floor and like the runes and stuff, most of the loot that drops on the floor, I shouldn't call it AFK, but if you go out to zombie pirates with a Venator bow and a cannon and a super low risk setup, you will make about 4 mil an hour. And this is in level 11 wildy, where it's really hard for PKers to be in the right level bracket to attack you. You will sometimes still get attacked out there, but you're using a Venator bow. You're not using a crossbow or an Earthsign chainmace. You're using a bow that doesn't use Revenant Ether. So as a result, you completely protect this item. So your risk on your setup can potentially be as low as 1 to 200k. It should be like less than 300k, I would say. And then you can go out to zombie pirates with this weapon and make about 4 mil an hour. And we're talking, you can go out and do this as soon as you have Wilderness Medium Diary. If you don't have Wilderness Medium Diary, don't go to zombie pirates because your drops are severely nerfed. But that is essentially the only requirement, is that you can have the Wilderness Medium Diary and that you have the 80 range that's required to wield the Venator bow. And you can make about 4 mil an hour, potentially up to 5 mil an hour if you take, like, I don't know, a Salve EI with you and a few pieces that boost your damage. You can make 4 to 5 mil an hour at zombie pirates with very, very little requirements. And I would say it is a use case of this weapon that, while it probably belongs on the bottom of the list, does belong on the list somewhere, just so I can try to make some people aware of the fact that zombie pirates are probably the best, like, no requirement or very, very low requirement moneymaker in the game right now, bar none. If you ask me, yeah, if I have a brand new account with a very like subpar set of levels, I'm rushing it to Wilderness, and like no money, I'm rushing it to Wilderness Medium Diary, and I'm going to zombie pirates so that I can get a starter bank. That's what I would do personally, just because it's kind of OP as like a very early game moneymaker right now. So these are the main use cases for the Whisperer, or for the Venator bow. So what I would say is that you primarily want to have this weapon if you're running a lot of Colosseum, if you're very wealthy and doing some Whisperer, or if you are like somebody who's pet hunting at Grotesque Guardians. Beyond that, the main accounts that this is useful for are any account that is 80 to 98 ranged, and also training at Slayer. So if you are training ranged and Slayer, you really don't want to pass on this weapon. And if it's possible for you to acquire it, despite the fact that it does have a pretty high price point, this is going to make your Slayer and range training much, much faster. Now, accounts that are at like level 80 range probably don't have 75 mil to buy a Venator bow. But by the time that you've done enough like Slayer and bossing to be at about 90, 92 ranged, then you probably do have enough money to where you can move stuff around and get a Venator bow, and this is going to give you 150k ranged experience an hour doing Dagonoths, for example. It's going to give you 120k ranged XP an hour doing Fire Giants and Bloodvelds in the Catacombs. Tasks that normally would be pretty like mediocre for you suddenly become very, very good if you have this weapon. And also, if you're doing Bloodveld, I should mention, it's actually better to do those in the laboratories underneath Mireditch, but assuming that you don't have that available, then you can do them in the Catacombs as well. But yeah, so this is a very strong weapon for Slayer, basically. And if you're training Slayer and have the money available where you could potentially get a hold of this thing and even just sell it when you're done, that's what I would say you should do, is you should buy this weapon with the intention that I'm going to use this to train my ranged up to 99 and my Slayer up to like really high, just however high I want it to get, and then I'm going to sell it so that I can go do other stuff once I'm done training ranged and Slayer. I would say, bravo, that is an excellent plan for an early game account, and this weapon has a very big role to feature in that plan. I would say it's definitely a route you could go, assuming that you have a little bit more starter cash on hand than maybe the average person does, because 75 mil is a pretty high price point. So yeah, it's a weapon that I'd say is really good. I wish it was a little bit cheaper, because the main people that it appeals to, it's a little too expensive for right now, which is players who are really trying to get their ranged and Slayer snowballing. But if they do have access to this weapon, I don't want them to forget how strong of an option it is for them. And then also the last group that I didn't mention that wants to have this weapon is any account that has a complete bank, because you will use this weapon for your Wilderness Slayer point boosting if you know what you're doing, and you will also use it for your hard clue farming, because the best way to farm hard clues is not the Rogue's Chest, trust me. The Rogue's Chest is good for hard clues if you are like already there for thieving XP, but if you're going out of your way specifically to farm hard clues, the Rogue's Chest is going to have you competing with bots way too often and getting PK'd way too often to be that efficient. If you go to Hellhounds in the Wilderness Slayer Cave with a Ring of Wealth eye equipped, you will almost never see a PKer because that location is extremely dead. You will never see a bot because there's no money to be made there. It will just be you and your 1 in 32 drop from the Hellhounds to get a hard clue. It is far, far superior to the Rogue's Chest for farming hard clues, in my opinion, and you need a Venator bow to do it with really good efficiency. So yeah, that is my long and short for the Venator bow. I hope that was helpful, and I will see you in the next one.